The water was deeper than it looked. By the time Boone Carter realized something was wrong, the current was already king. It had claimed a massive figure, someone thrashing against the rapids with a fury that didn't look like panic. It looked like a fight. Most men would have spurred their horse and kept riding. The frontier had a way of teaching you to mind your own business. But most men hadn't seen what he'd seen in those desperate movements. It wasn't the flailing of a helpless victim. It was the deliberate, calculated strikes of someone who knew how to fight, someone trying to kill a river, and the river was winning. He plunged his horse into the icy torrent without a second thought. The cold was a physical shock, a sledgehammer to the chest, but he pushed on. The figure was a woman, a giant of a woman, built with the kind of power you didn't see outside of legends. When he finally dragged her to the muddy bank, she stood nearly 6 feet tall. Water streamed from buckskin that seemed crafted for a warrior queen. Her hair was a black curtain, her limbs thick with muscle. She coughed up river water, then stood, not like someone saved, but like someone who had just been delayed. Her eyes held a sharpness that made him take a step back, an intelligence that was actively measuring him, weighing him, judging him. This wasn't just any woman. The intricate beadwork on her dress, the way she carried herself even while gasping for air, it all screamed importance. She spoke no English, not a word, but when she looked at him, it wasn't with gratitude. It felt more like an evaluation, like he was the one being tested. Before the sun broke the horizon the next morning, she was gone, vanished. The only signs she had ever been there were wet footprints on the dirt and a single, perfect eagle feather lying beside his bedroll. It was placed too precisely to be an accident. Boone figured that was the end of it, a strange encounter on a wild river. A story to tell someday if he ever found anyone to tell it to. That assumption lasted exactly 18 hours. The sound of approaching horses ripped through the evening calm. It wasn't one rider, or two. Boone counted at least a dozen. They moved with the silent, disciplined rhythm of warriors, but their formation felt ceremonial, almost like a procession. At their head rode a man whose presence seemed to bend the very air around him. He was older, his face a roadmap of scars that told stories of 100 battles. The regalia he wore wasn't just decoration. It was a declaration of leadership, of power earned in blood and wisdom. The man's eyes found Boone instantly. When he spoke, his English was perfect, measured, each word carrying a weight that made the silence feel heavy. "You pulled my daughter from the water." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Somehow this man already knew everything. But the way he said "daughter" made Boone's chest tighten. He hadn't just saved a woman. And the way the other warriors watched him, their hands never far from their weapons, told him this wasn't just any chief. This was something else entirely. "I have come to discuss your reward," the chief said, and the word "reward" hung in the air like smoke from a signal fire. But there was something in his tone, a cold, hard edge, that suggested this conversation wasn't about gratitude. It was about a debt that was about to be collected. What Boone Carter didn't know was that his simple act of courage had just thrown him into the middle of a war, and the reward he was about to be offered would cost him everything he thought he knew about being free. The chief, who called himself Nastas, gestured for Boone to sit. It wasn't a request. The dozen warriors behind him remained mounted, their eyes fixed on Boone, creating a silent, suffocating circle of intimidation. This wasn't a thank you. This was a summons. "My daughter was not in that river by accident," Nastas began, his voice low and hard. "She was on a mission for our people, a mission you interrupted." The accusation hit Boone like a physical blow. He'd thought he was a hero. Now he was being told he'd interfered. "She was drowning," Boone said, his own voice tight. "She is the strongest swimmer in our tribe," Nastas countered, his gaze unwavering. She was luring an enemy into a trap you sprang when you pulled her from the water. The world seemed to tilt beneath Boone. The woman, Ayana, hadn't been losing a fight with the river. She'd been acting. A performance meant for someone else's eyes. Someone who was apparently watching from the shadows. Who was she luring? Boone asked, the pieces clicking into place with sickening speed. Ayana's constant glances toward the hills, her restlessness, her sudden departure. She hadn't been scared. She had been hunting. Men who have come to our lands, Nastas said. Men who call themselves prospectors, but they search for something more valuable than gold. They are thieves and killers, led by a man with a serpent's tongue. One of the warriors behind Nastas spoke in their native tongue, a sharp, guttural sound. Nastas nodded. Grey Wolf reminds me that these men are ghosts. They move without honor, striking from the shadows. 3 of our hunters have disappeared in the last moon. We believe these outsiders are responsible. So Ayana had been acting as bait, putting her own life on the line to draw out these killers, and Boone, with his simple, clumsy heroism, had ruined it all. He hadn't saved her life. He had potentially doomed the missing hunters. The weight of it was crushing. Your arrival changed their plans, Nastas continued, his eyes boring into Boone. They saw you rescue her. They saw a stranger, an outsider, align himself with our people. Now they are confused, wary. This gives us an unexpected opportunity. The chief leaned forward, the firelight catching the cold glint in his eyes. You have created a complication, Boone Carter, and now you will help us resolve it. That is your reward. This wasn't an offer. It was an enlistment, a conscription. What if I refuse? Boone asked, though he already knew the answer. The 12 warriors surrounding him were the answer. Nastas smiled, but it was a chilling sight. The debt for interfering in the affairs of a chief's daughter is steep. Refusal would be unwise, but acceptance carries its own price. To help us, you must become one of us, truly one of us. He pulled a leather-wrapped bundle from his saddle. He unwrapped it slowly, ceremoniously. Inside wasn't a medallion. It was a knife. Old, the bone handle worn smooth with time, the blade made of a dark, obsidian-like stone that seemed to drink the firelight. This is a blood knife, Nastas explained. It is used for one ceremony only, the one that binds an outsider to the tribe. It makes their blood our blood, their fight our fight, their enemies our enemies. He held the knife out to Boone. You will hunt these men with us. You will help us find what they have done with our people. You will stand with us until this shadow is lifted from our lands. You will do this as a brother of our tribe. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Or you will be left here, in this valley, with nothing. No horse, no weapon, no supplies. The debt will be considered paid. Our ancestors can decide if you survive the journey out. The choice was no choice at all. One was a slim chance at survival, tied to a people he didn't know and a war he hadn't asked for. The other was a certain death sentence. Boone looked from the cold, hard face of the chief to the silent, watchful eyes of the warriors. He thought of Ayana's fierce intelligence, the power in her grip. She hadn't been drowning. She'd been at war. And now, so was he. He reached out and took the knife. Its weight was a cold, final promise in his hand. The reward wasn't a gift. It was a chain. As Boone's fingers closed around the bone handle of the blood knife, a change swept through the warriors. Their posture softened, the hard lines of suspicion on their faces easing almost imperceptibly. They weren't welcoming him, not yet, but they were acknowledging his decision. The ceremony will be tonight, Nastas declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. Ayana will be your guide. Just then, 2 riders broke from the main group and galloped back the way they had come. A few minutes later they returned, and riding between them was Ayana. She was no longer in the damp buckskin, but in dry, practical clothing, her hair tied back, her expression as fierce and unreadable as before. She dismounted and walked toward the fire, her eyes locking onto the blood knife in Boone's hand. There was no surprise in her gaze, only a quiet, intense assessment. She knew this was always how it was going to end. Her rescue was never going to be a simple act of kindness. It was an entanglement. "He accepts," Nastas said to her in their language. She replied with a single sharp nod, then turned her focus to Boone. "The life you had is over," she said, her English clear and direct, with only a slight musical accent. "Everything you were died when you pulled me from that river. Do you understand?" "I'm beginning to," Boone said, his voice hoarse. "Good," she said, without a trace of warmth. "Understanding is the first step. Survival is the rest." The ceremony was unlike anything Boone could have imagined. It wasn't about chants or dancing. It was stark, brutal, and deeply personal. Guided by Ayana's curt instructions, he was brought before Nastas. The chief used the ancient knife to make a small, precise cut on Boone's palm. Then, he made an identical cut on his own. Nastas clasped Boone's bleeding hand, pressing their wounds together. "My blood is your blood," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My people are your people. My enemies are your enemies. From this night until the spirits call you home, you are of the people." The words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the valley. One by one, the other warriors, including the skeptical Grey Wolf, came forward and repeated the gesture, each man pressing his hand against Boone's, adding his own blood to the bond. It was a deeply intimate, almost violent act of acceptance. When it was Ayana's turn, her hand was warm, her grip surprisingly soft for a woman of her strength. Her eyes held his, and for the first time, he saw something other than cold evaluation. It was a flicker of empathy, a shared understanding of the weight of this moment. "My debt to you is now a debt to a brother," she murmured, so quietly only he could hear. "I will see it paid." After the ceremony, the mood shifted. Supplies were shared. A warrior offered Boone a piece of dried meat, a gesture that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. They were no longer captor and prisoner. They were a war party. "Tomorrow, we hunt," Nastas announced to the group. "But not for the men, not yet. First, we find our missing hunters. These outsiders are careless. They leave a trail of disrespect on the land. We will read that trail and let it lead us to our brothers." He then turned to Boone. "The leader of these men is called Silas. My scouts have learned this much. He was once a map maker for the army. He is clever, and he has a sickness of the soul. He believes this land holds a secret, a power he can steal for himself." Boone felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the night air. A map maker. A man looking for something other than gold. The description was vague, but it stirred a dark, buried memory. A memory he had spent 5 years trying to outrun. "What kind of secret?" Boone asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Nastas stared into the fire, his expression grim. "An old story. A story of our ancestors. Silas believes it to be true. He is a man who would burn the world to possess one of its ashes." Later, as the camp settled for the night, Ayana approached Boone. She carried 2 bows and a quiver of arrows. "You will not use your fire stick," she said, nodding toward his rifle. "It is loud. It tells the enemy where you are. It is a coward's weapon. You will learn our way." She handed him one of the bows. It was taller than he was, made of a dark, dense wood, and the pull weight felt impossible. "Your training begins now," she stated. "By sunrise, you will be able to hit a tree from 30 paces. If you cannot, you will be a liability, and we leave liabilities behind." She wasn't threatening him. She was stating a fact. His life, which had been his own just yesterday, was now entirely dependent on his ability to adapt, to become one of them, to be worthy of the blood bond he now shared. As he struggled to even draw the massive bow, he realized the river had been the easy part. Surviving the reward was going to be the real fight. The night was a blur of pain and frustration. The bow was a beast, a stubborn length of yew that refused to bend to his will. His muscles, accustomed to the sharp kick of a rifle, screamed in protest against the slow, steady pull the bow demanded. By the time the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, his fingers were raw and his shoulder felt like it was on fire. But he could, finally, hit the tree. Most of the time. Ayana watched him, her expression unreadable. She hadn't offered a single word of encouragement, only curt corrections. "Your elbow is too high. You are not breathing. Do it again." Yet she hadn't left his side all night. She had fed the fire, fetched him water, and watched with an unnerving intensity. As the sun rose, she nodded once. A minuscule gesture, but it felt like a victory. "It will do," she said. "Now, we ride." The war party moved with a speed and silence that amazed Boone. They communicated with hand signals and sounds that mimicked birds and animals, flowing through the rugged terrain like water. They were not just traveling through the wilderness, they were a part of it. Boone, clumsy and loud by comparison, felt like a draft horse trying to run with wolves. Nastas led them, not on a direct path, but in a winding, seemingly random pattern. But Boone soon realized there was nothing random about it. The chief was reading the land itself. A broken twig here, an unnaturally disturbed patch of stones there. He was following a trail invisible to anyone else. After hours of riding, Nastas held up a hand, and the entire party froze. He dismounted and knelt, examining something on the ground. Ayana and Grey Wolf joined him. Boone followed, his curiosity overriding his caution. On the ground was a small, almost undetectable smear of ash. "A cold fire," Ayana said, touching the edge of it. 3 days old, maybe 4. "They were here," Grey Wolf growled, his hand resting on the handle of his tomahawk. He scanned the surrounding trees, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "They move with confidence. Too much confidence." Nastas stood and pointed toward a line of distant, jagged peaks. "They are heading toward the Shadow Canyon, the place of our ancestors. No one has entered that canyon in a generation." "It is sacred ground," Ayana whispered, a dark look crossing her face. "Forbidden." "Silas is not a man who respects what is forbidden," Nastas said grimly. "He follows a map of greed. He is looking for the sunken cave." The name sent a ripple of unease through the warriors. They exchanged worried glances. Boone didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear. This Silas wasn't just trespassing. He was committing a sacrilege. "What is the sunken cave?" Boone asked Ayana quietly. "A place from the stories of the first people," she replied, her voice low. "A place where the spirits of the mountain are said to sleep. It is not for the living." The party pressed on, moving faster now, a grim urgency settling over them. They were no longer just tracking invaders. They were racing to stop a desecration. Late in the afternoon, Grey Wolf, who had been scouting ahead, came racing back, his face a mask of fury and grief. He spoke to Nastas in a torrent of their native language, pointing back the way he came. "What is it?" Boone asked Ayana. Her face was pale, her jaw tight. "He found them," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Our hunters." Nastas led them to a small, hidden clearing. The 3 missing hunters were there. They had not been killed in a fight. They had been executed, arranged in a grotesque tableau, a clear and brutal message to anyone who might follow. But that wasn't the worst part. Carved into the chest of each man was a symbol, a crude drawing of a serpent eating its own tail. The moment Boone saw it, the blood in his veins turned to ice. The world narrowed to a single, roaring point. The memories he had buried for 5 years erupted like a volcano. He knew that symbol. He knew the man who used it. Silas wasn't just some random prospector. Boone knew exactly who he was. 5 years ago, Boone had ridden with a man named Silas Kane, a charismatic, intelligent man who had been a cartographer for the army before deserting, but his charm was a thin veneer over a core of pure, rotten ambition. Kane was obsessed with native legends, not out of respect, but because he believed they were literal treasure maps leading to forgotten power. Boone had been young, naive, looking for adventure. He'd joined Kane's expedition, believing they were explorers, but he soon learned they were grave robbers. The final straw had come in a quiet village in the southern plains. Kane had tortured an old medicine man for information about a burial site, and when the old man wouldn't talk, Kane had used that exact symbol, the serpent, to mark his victims before burning the village to the ground. Boone had fled that night, horrified by what he'd become a part of. He'd been running ever since, haunted by the faces of the dead and the symbol of the serpent. He had changed his name, moved north, and tried to disappear. And now his past had found him. It hadn't just caught up to him, it had ambushed him, dragging him into the one conflict he could never run from. "You know this, Mark," Nastas said. It wasn't a question. He had seen the look on Boone's face. Boone could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. "This is the mark of Silas?" Ayanna asked, her eyes searching his. "His full name is Silas Kane," Boone managed to say, his voice a ragged whisper. "And he's not just a prospector, he's a monster. I know, because I used to ride with him." The confession hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The warriors who had just begun to accept him now stared at him with renewed suspicion. Grey Wolf took a step forward, his hand clenching the handle of his tomahawk, his face a mask of pure hatred. He didn't just see Boone Carter anymore. He saw a friend of his enemy. He saw a traitor. The air in the clearing crackled with tension. Grey Wolf's accusation hung unspoken, but was clear in his eyes. Boone had led this evil to them. He was a part of it. "You rode with the man who did this?" Grey Wolf snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He took another step toward Boone, every line of his body screaming violence. Before Boone could answer, Ayanna stepped between them. She didn't look at Grey Wolf. Her eyes were locked on Boone, searching, demanding the truth. "I left," Boone said, his voice raw with the shame of the old memory. 5 years ago. I saw what he was willing to do. I ran. I've been running ever since." "You did not fight him? You did not stop him?" Grey Wolf spat. "You are a coward." "I was a boy," Boone shot back, a flash of the old guilt turning to anger. "I was scared and stupid, but I am not that boy anymore." Nastas raised a hand, and the tension subsided, though it did not disappear. The chief's gaze was heavy, analytical. He was re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about this outsider he had bound to his family. "Your past has followed you here, Boone Carter," Nastas said, his voice grave. "Or perhaps the spirits have led you here to face it. This changes things. You are no longer just a warrior fighting for his new people. You are a man facing his own ghost." He turned his gaze from Boone to the grim scene of the murdered hunters. "This knowledge you carry, it is a weapon. You know how this Silas Kane thinks. You know his methods, his weaknesses." "His weakness is his pride," Boone said, the words coming easily now that the dam of his secret had broken. "He underestimates everyone. He thinks native beliefs are just childish stories. He'll walk right into a sacred place because he believes it's just a cave, not understanding the real power it holds." "The power is not in the cave," Nastas corrected him gently. "It is in our faith. But you are right. His arrogance will be his undoing. We will use it against him." The discovery of the hunters and Boone's confession galvanized the war party. Grief was forged into a cold, hard resolve. They were no longer just on a mission. They were on a path of vengeance. They moved into the shadow canyon as dusk began to fall. The place lived up to its name. The canyon walls were sheer black rock that seemed to swallow the light, and a strange, oppressive silence filled the air. The temperature dropped, and the wind whispered through the rocks with a sound like mournful voices. Even the horses were skittish, their ears twitching at sounds Boone couldn't hear. "Kane's men came this way," Boone said, pointing to a set of hoof prints that were deeper than their own. "They're carrying something heavy, equipment, maybe explosives." The thought made his stomach clench. Kane wouldn't hesitate to blast his way into a sacred place. Ayanna rode beside him, her earlier suspicion replaced by a focused intensity. "You know this man," she said, her voice low. "If you were him, where would you make your camp?" Boone thought for a moment, picturing Kane's tactical mind. Not in the open. He'd want high ground. A defensible position with a clear view of the canyon entrance, but hidden from the main path. He'll have sentries posted. He scanned the towering rock formations. "There," he said, pointing to a small, almost invisible ledge about halfway up the canyon wall. "It's hidden by that outcrop. It gives a perfect vantage point. That's where he'll be." Nastas looked at the ledge, then at Boone, a flicker of respect in his eyes. He gave a series of quiet commands in his native tongue. The war party split into 3 groups. One, led by Grey Wolf, would circle around the back of the ridge, a long and treacherous climb, to cut off any retreat. Another would create a diversion at the mouth of the canyon. The third group was just Nastas, Ayanna, and Boone. "We 3 will go straight up," Nastas said. "The direct approach is the one they will least expect, his arrogance, as you said." The climb was terrifying. They moved in the deepening twilight, finding handholds and footholds in the sheer rock face that seemed impossibly small. Boone, used to the saddle, found his muscles screaming in protest. Above him, Ayanna moved with the fluid grace of a mountain cat, seemingly fearless. As they neared the ledge, they could hear the low murmur of voices and the crackle of a small, smokeless fire. Kane was just as clever as Boone remembered. They pulled themselves over the final lip of rock, concealed by the deep shadows. There were 6 men in the camp, huddled around the fire. They were hard-faced men, mercenaries by the look of them, and standing near the edge of the cliff, staring down into the canyon through a spyglass, was a 7th man. Even from behind, Boone knew him. The confident posture, the expensive leather coat. It was Silas Kane. But then, another figure emerged from the shadows of the camp, walking toward Kane, and Boone's heart stopped. It was one of Nastas's own warriors, a man named Koba, who had shared his blood with Boone just the night before. Koba handed Kane a small leather pouch. Kane opened it, looked inside, and then laughed, a low, cruel sound that echoed in the silent canyon. The betrayal was so stunning, so absolute, that for a moment, Boone couldn't breathe. It wasn't just Silas Kane and his mercenaries they were fighting. There was a traitor among them. The sight of Koba with Silas Kane sent a shockwave through their small party. Nastas let out a barely audible hiss, a sound of pure fury. Ayanna's hand tightened on the handle of her knife, her knuckles white. The betrayal was a deeper wound than any blade could inflict. Koba was one of their own. He had mourned the dead hunters with them. He had taken the blood oath. It was unthinkable. "He told them our plan," Ayanna whispered, her voice laced with venom. "The diversion, Grey Wolf's flanking move. They know." It was a trap. Their entire strategy was compromised. They were the ones walking into an ambush, not the other way around. "No," Boone breathed, his mind racing, connecting the dots. "It's worse than that. Koba didn't just tell them our plan. He gave Kane what he was looking for." He pointed to the small pouch Koba had given Kane. Kane wasn't just looking for a place. He was looking for a key, something to open it, An artifact, a stone, something from the tribe. Koba just delivered it. Nastas looked at Boone. His eyes narrowed. How do you know this? Because that's how he operates, Boone explained, the old memories flooding back. He never just storms a place. He studies it, learns its legends, finds its secrets. He believes native magic is real, but that it's like a machine. He thinks if he has the right parts, he can control it. He doesn't want to just rob the sunken cave. He wants to own its power. Down below, Silas Kane clapped Koba on the shoulder, a gesture of partnership that was sickening to watch. Then Kane turned to his men. "Get ready," he called out, his voice sharp and clear in the thin mountain air. "Our friends will be arriving shortly. Give them a warm welcome." The mercenaries grinned and picked up their rifles, moving to take positions along the edge of the cliff, their guns aimed down at the path where the diversionary force would soon appear. They had only seconds to act. "We can't warn them," Ayanna said, her voice tight with desperation. "Any sound we make will give us away." "We don't need to," Nastas said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. All the wisdom and diplomacy were gone, replaced by the pure, cold focus of a warrior chief. "We changed the plan. They expect an attack from below. They expect an attack from the rear. They do not expect one from within." He looked at Boone, then at Ayanna. There was no time for a complex strategy. "The traitor is mine," Nastas growled, his eyes fixed on Koba. "Ayanna, the men with rifles. Boone, Carter, you deal with your ghost." The plan was suicide. 3 of them against 7, on a narrow ledge, with no element of surprise left. But there was no other choice. With a silent nod from Nastas, they moved. Not down, but sideways, melting into the deeper shadows at the edge of the camp. They moved like spirits, their feet making no sound on the hard rock. Boone's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The moment he had been running from for 5 years. There was no more hiding, no more disappearing. The past was right in front of him, holding a spyglass and a stolen key to a sacred place. Ayanna was the first to strike, a shadow detaching from other shadows. Her knife flashed once, a silver arc in the firelight. One of the sentries crumpled without a sound, a look of surprise frozen on his face. Before the others could react, she was on the second man, a whirlwind of controlled, deadly motion. At the same instant, Nastas launched himself toward Koba. It wasn't a charge, it was an execution. The chief moved with the speed of a striking snake, his tomahawk in hand. Koba turned, his eyes wide with shock at seeing his chief appear as if from thin air. He had no time to scream. The sudden, silent violence threw the camp into chaos. The remaining mercenaries spun around, confused, trying to locate the threat. That's when Boone moved. He didn't go for the mercenaries. He went for Silas Kane. Kane turned, his face a mask of shock that quickly curdled into a sneer of recognition. "Well, well," he hissed, dropping the spyglass. "Look what the river washed in. Boone, I always knew you were a coward, but I never figured you for a traitor to your own kind." "You're not my kind, Silas," Boone said, pulling the heavy bow from his back, an arrow already nocked. It was clumsy, slow, compared to a pistol, but it was silent. Kane laughed, a high, manic sound. "Still playing with toys, I see." He drew a large, ornate pistol from his belt. "I've upgraded." He fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed canyon. The bullet screamed past Boone's ear, close enough to feel its heat, and ricocheted off the rock wall behind him. Boone released his arrow. It wasn't a perfect shot. His heart was pounding too hard, his hands slick with sweat. But it was close enough. The arrow sank into Kane's shoulder, spinning him around with the force of the impact. He roared in pain and fury. The gunshot had alerted everyone. Below, the diversionary force would know the fight had started. Behind them, Grey Wolf's climbers would be scrambling to reach them. But right now, on this ledge, they were on their own. 2 mercenaries turned their rifles toward Boone. He was exposed, with no time to knock another arrow. He was a dead man. But then Ayanna was there. She threw her knife with impossible speed and accuracy. It spun end over end, burying itself in the throat of one of the riflemen. She drew a second knife from her boot and engaged the other in a brutal, close-quarters fight. Cain, clutching his bleeding shoulder, staggered back toward the far side of the ledge. He wasn't running for the trail. He was running toward a dark crevice in the rock face that Boone hadn't seen before, the entrance to the sunken cave. "It's not over, Boone!" Cain screamed, his face contorted in a mask of pain and madness. "This power is mine. The spirits of this mountain will answer to me." He fumbled with the leather pouch Koba had given him, pulling out a smooth, glowing stone. It was the key. He held it up, and the dark crevice seemed to hum, a low vibration that Boone could feel in the soles of his boots. Cain scrambled into the darkness of the cave. Boone knew he had to follow. Leaving Silas Cain alone in a sacred place, armed with a key he didn't understand, was not an option. He was about to plunge into the darkness after him when Nastas's hand clamped down on his shoulder. The chief had dealt with the traitor. Now his face was grim, his eyes filled with an ancient fear. "Stop!" Nastas commanded. "You cannot follow him." "We have to," Boone argued. "He'll destroy whatever's in there." "You do not understand," Nastas said, his voice tight. "The cave is not a tomb. It is a prison. What is locked inside must never be set free." The low humming from the cave entrance grew louder, changing in pitch. It became a deep, resonant thrumming, like a giant heartbeat echoing from the stone. A sickly green light began to pulse from within, casting long, dancing shadows across the ledge. The mercenaries, seeing their leader abandon them and witnessing the terrifying light, broke and ran. They scrambled down the treacherous path, only to be met by Grey Wolf and his warriors coming up. The sounds of a short, brutal fight echoed from below, but on the ledge, all eyes were on the glowing cave mouth. "What is in there?" Boone asked, his own heart starting to pound in time with the rhythmic pulse from the cave. Ayanna came to stand beside them, her face pale in the eerie green light. "The stories say it is a spirit of hunger," she said, her voice a hushed whisper. "A thing that devoured the light from the stars. The first people tricked it into the mountain and locked it away. The key was meant to keep the door sealed, not to open it. Silas Cain, in his arrogance and greed, hadn't found a source of power. He had found a cage, and he was about to open the door from the inside. The pulsing green light from the sunken cave intensified, spilling out onto the ledge like a toxic fog. The thrumming sound vibrated through the rock, a deep, nauseating hum that made Boone's teeth ache. Silas Cain's triumphant laughter echoed from within, distorted and warped by the strange acoustics of the cavern. "It's too late!" Cain's voice boomed, sounding unnaturally loud. "The old magic answers to a new master now." "He is a fool," Nastas breathed, his face etched with a dread that went deeper than the fear of any mortal enemy. "He thinks he is commanding it. He is feeding it." "Feeding it what?" Boone asked. "His ambition," Ayanna answered, her eyes wide with horror. "His greed, his hate. The hunger spirit consumes such things. It makes them its own." A wave of intense cold rolled out of the cave, so biting it felt like it was freezing the air in their lungs. The mercenaries' abandoned campfire flickered and died, its flames instantly extinguished. Inside the cave, Cain's laughter turned into a scream, a shriek of pure, unadulterated terror that was cut short with a sickening, wet crunch. The green light flared, bright as a bolt of lightning, and then the thrumming stopped. Silence. A dead, absolute silence that was more terrifying than the noise had been. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. They just stared at the dark, silent maw of the cave. Grey Wolf and his warriors appeared on the ledge, their faces grim from the fight below. but their expressions turned to confusion and awe at the sight of their chief and Ayanna staring at the cave. "What happened?" Grey Wolf demanded. "Where is Silas?" "He found what he was looking for," Nastas said, his voice hollow. As he spoke, a figure stumbled out of the cave entrance. It was Silas Kane, but it wasn't. He was still wearing the same clothes, but his body was twisted, his limbs bent at unnatural angles. His skin was a pale, ghastly gray, covered in a network of black, pulsing veins. But the worst part was his eyes. They were gone. In their place were two swirling vortexes of pure green light, burning with a cold, ancient malice. The glowing stone, the key, was embedded in his chest, pulsing in time with the light in his eyes. This is power. The thing that was once Silas Kane rasped, its voice a discordant chorus of whispers and growls. It was Kane's voice, but layered with something else, something old and vast and utterly inhuman. It took a stumbling step forward, and the rock beneath its boot seemed to wither and blacken, turning to dust. "The prison is broken," Nastas said, raising his tomahawk, "and the jailer has become the prisoner." The Silas thing turned its glowing eyes toward them. It no longer looked at them as a man would. It looked at them like a wolf looks at sheep, like food. "The world of men is so full of delicious little hatreds," it whispered, a grotesque smile twisting its lips. "So much fear, so much greed. I have slept for an eternal winter. Now it is time to feast." Without warning, it lunged. It moved with a terrifying, unnatural speed, its crooked limbs propelling it across the ledge in the blink of an eye. It wasn't aiming for Nastas or the other warriors, bristling with weapons. It was aiming for Ayanna. Boone reacted without thinking. He shoved Ayanna out of the way, putting himself directly in the path of the creature. He had no time to draw his bow, no time to reach for a knife. He just braced for impact. The creature slammed into him, its strength monstrous. The force of the blow lifted Boone off his feet and sent them both tumbling toward the edge of the cliff. Boone's head struck the rock, and the world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain. His last sensation was of falling into a cold, silent darkness, with the creature's chilling whispers echoing in his mind. He had run from his ghost for 5 years, only to be dragged over a cliff by it. He had saved Ayanna, but in doing so, he had doomed himself. The fall felt like an eternity. Boone was dimly aware of the creature's unnatural grip, its cold, dead flesh pressed against him. He saw the jagged rocks of the canyon floor rushing up to meet them. This was it. This was how it ended. A fittingly brutal end for a life spent running. But then, something snagged him. A rope, thrown with incredible precision, looped around his ankle. His descent stopped with a violent, bone-jarring jolt that nearly tore his leg from its socket. He was swinging, upside down, a few dozen feet from the canyon floor. Above him, he could see Ayanna, her face a mask of fierce determination, straining to hold the rope, her boots digging into the loose rock at the cliff's edge. Nastas and Grey Wolf were rushing to her side to help anchor it. The Silas creature had not been so lucky. It had plummeted past him, its whispering voice fading, and hit the rocks below with a sound like a sack of wet cement. For a moment, it lay still, a broken, twisted heap. Then, slowly, impossibly, it began to stir. The green light in its eyes flared. Black tendril-like shadows began to seep from its body, slithering across the rocks, stitching its broken limbs back together. The thing was unkillable. "Pull him up!" Ayanna shouted, her voice strained. "Quickly!" The warriors hauled him up the cliff face, his body scraping against the rock. He collapsed onto the ledge, his head spinning, his body a symphony of pain. The Silas creature was on its feet now, its head twisted at a completely unnatural angle. It looked up at them, and the multi-layered voice echoed up the canyon walls. "You cannot kill what is already death," it rasped. "This vessel is weak, but it will serve. It will carry me from this desolate place and back into the world of men. It began to climb. It moved like a spider, its crooked limbs finding purchase on the sheer rock face, scaling the cliff with a terrifying speed. "Our weapons are useless against it," Grey Wolf said, his voice tight with a warrior's frustration. He had fired an arrow at the creature as it climbed, only to see it pass harmlessly through its body, as if through smoke. "It is not a thing of flesh and blood," Nastas said, his eyes on the approaching horror. "It is a shadow given form. It must be returned to the darkness." "The cave," Boone said, forcing himself to his knees. "We have to get it back in the cave." "The door is broken," Ayanna said. "Cain shattered the seals." "Then we make a new one," Boone said, his mind clearing through the pain. He looked at the entrance to the sunken cave, then at the key, the glowing green stone still embedded in the creature's chest. "It's the stone, the key. It's the source of its power. It's anchoring it to this world. If we can get that stone off of it—" "And put it where?" Grey Wolf demanded. "Back in the cave," Boone finished. "We don't need to seal the door. We just need to throw the lock back inside." It was a desperate, insane plan. One of them would have to get close enough to the creature to physically rip the stone from its chest, then get it back into the cave before the thing could recover. It was a suicide mission. The creature was halfway up the cliff now, its glowing green eyes fixed on them, a promise of a slow, agonizing end. "I will do it," Nastas said, his voice resonating with the authority of a chief prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. "I am the leader of this people. This is my burden to bear." "No," Ayanna said, stepping in front of her father. "You are the past. I am the future. The future must be protected. The duty falls to me." Before either of them could move, Boone staggered to his feet. He looked at the chief who had taken him in, at the fierce warrior woman who had saved his life. He looked at the people who had given him a home when he had none. His life of running was over. He had found something worth standing for, something worth dying for. "You're both wrong," Boone said, pulling the heavy bone-handled blood knife from his belt. "This thing, this ghost, it came for me. My past led it here. My debt to you all is the one that must be paid." He turned to face the climbing creature, which was now just feet from the ledge. "This is my fight," he said, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt no fear, only a calm, cold certainty. "I'm not running anymore." He didn't wait for an argument. As the sightless creature hauled itself onto the ledge, its face a nightmare of green light and twisted flesh, Boone charged. The creature swiped at him with a clawed hand. The air sizzled where its talons passed. Boone dove under the attack, rolling and coming up inside its guard, too close for it to bring its unnatural strength to bear. He drove the blood knife, the symbol of his new life, deep into the creature's chest, right beside the glowing green stone. The creature roared, a sound that was not of this world. It thrashed wildly, but Boone held on, using his other hand to grip the glowing stone. It burned with a cold that felt like it was freezing his soul, but he didn't let go. "Boone!" Ayanna screamed, rushing forward to help. "Stay back!" he yelled, his muscles straining. "Get ready to seal the cave!" He planted his feet and pulled. With a final agonized roar, he ripped the stone from the creature's chest. The effect was instantaneous. The green light in the creature's eyes died. The black veins on its skin receded. The unnatural energy holding it together vanished. For a split second, it was just the dead body of Silas Cain, a look of eternal terror on its face. Then it crumbled into a pile of gray dust and blew away in the wind. Boone stood, gasping, the glowing stone clutched in his hand. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, a hungry cold that was trying to seep into his bones, trying to claim him as its new host. He could feel its whispers in his mind, promising power, promising revenge. "The cave! Now!" Nastas shouted. Boone turned and ran for the dark entrance. He could feel the stone's influence growing stronger with every step, the temptation to keep it, to use its power, becoming almost overwhelming. He saw a flash of his old life, of the power he could have wielded at Silas Kane's side. He gritted his teeth and rejected it. That was the old Boone, the coward. He reached the mouth of the cave and, with every ounce of strength he had left, he hurled the glowing stone deep into the darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low groan echoed from the heart of the mountain. The ground shuddered. The entrance to the sunken cave began to collapse, huge slabs of rock falling from above, sealing the entrance completely. A cloud of ancient dust billowed out, and then silence. The prison was sealed once more. The key was locked back inside. Boone collapsed to his knees, his body screaming in protest, his mind blessedly quiet for the first time in years. The ghost was gone. Ayanna and Nastas were at his side in an instant. Ayanna gently took the hand that had held the stone. It was pale and cold, the skin blistered as if by frostbite, but she held it, warming it with her own. Nastas placed a heavy hand on Boone's shoulder. He looked at the sealed cave, then at Boone, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his weathered face. It was a look of profound respect. "The blood bond is fulfilled," the chief said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have faced your ghost and protected your people. You are no longer Boone Carter, the outsider. You are Boone, the ghost slayer, a true son of the people." Grey Wolf and the other warriors gathered around, their faces no longer holding any trace of suspicion. They looked at him with awe and gratitude. In the crucible of the Shadow Canyon, under the light of a malevolent spirit, he had finally, truly, earned his place. He looked at Ayanna, who was still holding his hand, her fierce eyes softened with a look he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just respect. It was something deeper. He had come to this land a solitary drifter, running from his past. He had nearly died in a river, been forced into a war, and faced a supernatural horror. But as he knelt there on the hard rock, surrounded by his new family, he realized he had finally found the one thing he hadn't even known he was looking for. He was home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an adventure. We've got a story about a lone trapper who stumbles upon a hidden valley where the dinosaurs never went extinct, and you're not going to want to miss it. It's coming up right on your screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.